Is there a way we can manage risks in business? And how do I know where to prioritize my attention and to use my limited resources? The good news is there are simple principles and techniques we can learn to help get our arms around business risks and to manage them effectively. Let's dive into this topic and see how we can identify, track, and communicate risks better. Hello, I'm your host, George Brockman. For the first 20 years or so of my professional life, I dedicated myself as a technology worker, doing a little bit of everything from programming and data management and network management, and even some technical support. But over the years, I moved slowly into more of a functional management role where I was running departments and teams instead of actually doing the hands on work. However, for the last decade or so, I've been managing projects and consulting for companies in a wide array of business types. Through it all, I've enjoyed teaching and sharing what I've learned. Sometimes I learn that stuff through rigorous coursework or study, and sometimes I learn things through the school of hard knocks and making mistakes along the way. But for over a decade, I've applied this particular set of ideas in my practice as a project manager. But this process is actually something I learned early in my management career, and the techniques have been proven powerful and applicable in a variety of different scenarios and across different types. In this video, we're going to be looking at the types of project or business risks. We're going to be looking at how to think about risks and how to turn these from abstract, scary things to things that will those things that will keep us up at night to manageable threats that we can plan our response to in advance, therefore reducing their ability to prevent our success. We're going to be giving business a chance to take a sober and planned look and decide how to prevent loss or delays. Look, risks happen, but we want to reduce their ability to impact our projects or to surprise us at first, and then keep them from scuttling the whole effort. We do want to talk about the principles first. We want to get the conceptual high level idea of what risk management is and how we can think about it in an objective way. We're going to be looking at some of the practices of risk management. We're going to be setting up a risk register and actually walking through the steps of identifying risks and setting some priorities. And then finally, we're going to look at the process of how we can best maintain that list and maintain awareness and try to work through a way to retire or mitigate risks. You may notice I usually refer to project management as a context for these techniques, but it's in this course, remember this belongs to a wide variety of processes. Now, in a future video coming soon, we're going to be looking at setting up Excel with the ability to manage a risk register. It'll make it much easier to track and communicate with your team and your leaders. How do you think about risks? Do you know your own personal risk tolerance? How much risk can you be comfortable with, or at what level of risk do you consider unacceptable? And perhaps more importantly, what is your organization's risk tolerance? Answering these questions will help us guide us through the next steps about how rigorously or formally we can or should address this topic. Regardless of the level of formality or rigor, it is foolish to undertake a major effort without following these basic steps. We have to start with an understanding that we are trading time spent in planning to reduce the chance of bigger loss of time or money down the road. Skipping this process to jump ahead on the project can cost you in bigger delays. I can tell you from professional experience, the process can save projects considerable time and money. Remember, We all have different ideas about what risks are acceptable, and we should be mindful to share these with the team. The reality is life and business will always include risks. The goals of risk management to clearly identify the risks that can be anticipated and to reduce those risks as much as possible. The whole effort is to try to avoid threats to the effort's success. Moving forward, we will be moving towards working to the path, so to speak, to give us the best shot of a smooth project. First, let's clarify some of the terms we'll be using when we're discussing this process. First term we want to look at is risk. We can think of risk as anything that can negatively impact our ability to meet the goals or of the project effort. Would it cost us more money than planned? Would it take us longer to complete? Would it prevent us from meeting one of the requirements, maybe a quality or a goal, the key deliverable? Next, we have probability. What is the likelihood that the negative event would be encountered? Here we are talking not about high precision mathematical estimates, but a reasonable ballpark. Is this not likely to happen at all, or is it almost a virtual certainty? Usually it's somewhere in between. Next, we want to talk about impact. How bad would it be if this risk were realized? Does this risk have the potential to set the project back, threaten the ability or to even complete the work, or put the team or the whole organization in some sort of jeopardy? Remember now that impacts can be financial, legal, or even related to physical safety. Now, both of these numbers are going to be based on a combination of educated estimate from subject matter experts, research. Sometimes it's just a gut level check. The more uncertainty there is, the higher the risk probability or impact should be. Uncertainty is an incredible risk multiplier, and we are trying to deliberately clear up uncertainty. Remember, I said you needed to understand the risk tolerance of the organization. The precision and accuracy of these numbers will be driven by that tolerance. A group that is very risk adverse, not willing to take big risks without careful planning, the more effort should be put into getting these things identified. Using these first two sets of values, we're going to come up with a risk score. This is the product of multiplying the probability and the impact of the risk. If we express both of these numerically, we can compute a score by multiplying the two values. Simply put, the risk score is a combination of the two values of probability and impact on how big the exposure is on this risk. Next, we have a response. This is a deliberate action or decision on how to react to this risk. We are going to look at some of the options for our response, but for now understand it comes from a fairly limited set of strategies. Then we have the risk response plan. This is a description of actions to be taken in response to the plan to achieve the stated response. This is more detailed and can come from a straightforward sentence to a fully documented contingency plan. We're going to be talking about collecting a risk register. It is a collection of identified risks and their scores, and the response is documented and maintained. This is your risk list, so to speak. Keep in mind there are three things that are numeric values: probability, impact, and score. Given this vocabulary, let's talk about the three numerical items. In the overall score of risk, we're multiplying the probability and the impact for each risk. Instinctively, some people are drawn more to focus on one parameter or the other. Some people really focus on the high impact risks. If it happens, it's going to be horrible. Or the things that are more likely. Those are the things we focus our attention on. The reality is it's more about the combined score than about either one of the numbers alone. We multiply these two values for each risk to get a better understanding of the exposure they represent. Low values on one attribute, either probability or impact, combined with low or medium values of the other can leave us with an overall low risk score. In our example here, I've indicated a low score with the green color coding. A high risk on one value combined with a low or medium on the other may move it up into concerning values of the overall score, but it still doesn't reach a high level. It's still a medium level risk in most cases. In this case, we're going to look at and treat medium scores with a yellow just for clarity. When both the values, the probability and the impact, are high or medium, then the overall score is troubling and needs to get our priority, as we indicate here with the color red. Now, the scale of these numbers is something that's decided in advance. It's recommended that you pick up a numeric scale of something like 3 to 5 possible values. For example, 1 to 5 or 1 to 3 and whole numbers. Next, we want to look at our responses. As mentioned before, responses typically fall into a fairly short list of categories, and these categories will help indicate the posture the team is taking in dealing with this risk. These responses should be clearly documented and agreed upon by the whole team. It's a bad idea to make this an arbitrary decision made by a single person. Our first option is avoidance, deciding to change the plan to prevent the risk from even being an issue. We may choose to eliminate a feature or requirement. We may decide to drop a software element or a design element of the construction. In many cases, however, the team doesn't have this option. So next we turn to mitigate or reduce the risk. Make changes to lower the risk's impact, either in probability or in impact. In software, we may choose a different language or platform. In construction, we may pick a different material or design approach. We may even choose to add more time to the project to allow for repair or catch-up work. We could also share or transfer the risk. This entails finding a way to have others own the risk, usually by engaging a third party, either internally or externally, and having them own that risk. This can be by securing insurance or reaching out to specialists. Bear in mind, just assigning this to someone else doesn't count as sharing or transferring if the accountability of the success is still on your team's shoulders. This is not about shifting blame, but about moving the impact of the cost somewhere else. There's also retention or acceptance. We just move forward with the risk with contingencies or willingness to bear the outcome, and we just live with it. We know it could happen, so we build contingencies, or we just live with the reality and make sure sponsors are aware. Sometimes there's nothing you can do but move forward and accept the risk. When setting up our risk register, let's say for argument's sake that we want to use a score pretty straightforward of 1 to 5, from very, very bad is a 5 and very, very probable is a 5. And we'll use that for right now. Okay, so let's take a look at a sample risk register. We're just going to set one up for our software project. And we're going to say that we are concerned about the loss of a key developer from the team. And so I've brought in my stakeholders and we've talked about it. And we're like going, well, that could be really bad because we have tight resource limits. We don't have a lot of spare staff. So the impact of that loss of training, loss of product knowledge, the impact of that could be pretty good. So we say that's a 3. And we don't know. We haven't talked to our development team yet. So we'll look at this and kind of say, well, we think that's a 50-50 chance. We'll put that as a probability of 3 as well. So that gives us a score, multiply those two together, and that score is going to come out to be a 9. Now, another risk that we can consider is competitor beats us to the market. Now, if they beat us to the market, that certainly puts us at a disadvantage, but it doesn't stop us from moving forward. So we'll say that impact is a 2. That's kind of an expert judgment kind of thing. And again, we don't know what the competitor is working on, so we'll say 3 as well. So what happens if the customer rejects the new feature? Well, that's actually kind of a showstopper. That means the project is completely failed. So we're going to put that as a 5. Now the probability, 50-50. So we'll give that a score of a 3. And so far now we've got our new highest score. So let's consider the possibility of a ransomware attack. Now, the impact of those can be devastating to the whole organization, but especially to my project. It's a showstopper. We're going to give that a 5. Now, I do have my IT team included in these meetings, and so I know they're actually saying we've rolled out some new protections, we've got better backups. The probability of that is actually a 1. So that gives us a low score, even though the outcome would have been bad, gives us an overall score of 5. Now with all the scores completed, let's prioritize these. Let's identify what is the highest ranking one. And that highest ranking one right there with a big old 15, the customer rejects the features. If we lose somebody from the team, that's our next highest risk. And we come down to competitor just beats us to market. And that's our top 3 risks. And that's really what we want to stop with right now. We want to focus on the top. Now, what do we want to do with this? What is our response? Well, let's say we want to mitigate the customer rejection. We've got an idea for that, and we'll try to mitigate the loss of key developers. And unfortunately, it's not what we can do with the competitor, so we're going to have to kind of, for right now, accept that risk. And finally, we're going to do the same with ransomware. We can't really do much about it for right now because it's also the lowest one. We're not going to put a lot of attention on that one. In the course of our meeting, we decided our mitigation for our biggest risk is to actually bring in a customer in. Let's do some focus groups. Let's actually engage the customer in helping to create this new functionality. If we do that, then we can adjust the probability of this being rejected. So let's lower this number down to a 1 because they worked with us. They are part owner of this solution now. Our next risk, we want to come up with a mitigation, and we may expand the team. We may bring a second developer in the front so that we don't have that horrible situation if we lose somebody. So we'll lower that impact to a 1. And if finally for the ransomware, just to be really safe, we can assign that risk to insurance, or we can take that IT security team, let them be part owners of the security risk, and that makes it a transferred instead of an accepted risk. Looking at our overall risk register now, we've come down to a completely different landscape than what we started with. The competitor getting to market first is now our biggest risk. So that's an area where we can focus on put our efforts into moving that one forward. But overall, our risk landscape is pretty low now. Now that we have an idea of what makes up the risk register, let's visualize it for tracking. If this is in Excel or Smartsheets or some other list-based software, we may want to sort the risks by descending order. We could even color code the items by risk score. In our example earlier, the highest risk is actually overall a medium scored risk. All the other risks are mitigated or transferred. Now this should be reviewed periodically and prepared to add new risks if they occur to the team, and work to remove items regularly. Now we've covered what you could consider a bare minimum risk register. However, we can do much better than that and give our stakeholders a much clearer picture. For example, a risk title, which is a short summary of the risk. This provides a shorthand for referring to the risk in conversations and is much simpler than keeping up with a line number or a restatement of the full risk. The title is handy for referring to in a risk discussion. We can have an impact description, a more detailed explanation of what is being avoided. Not just the servers could all crash and we would lose data, but the impact that spells out what that means to the project. It could include financial loss, loss of customer confidence, or even legal impacts. In documenting this, you may uncover additional risks as you realize the impact could be more extensive than originally thought. Let's take the server crashes, for example. This could cause lost data, but also service outages where the customer may not be able to access your service. This could trigger service level agreements you may have with customers, which could even trigger legal or financial penalties. Quickly, this becomes quite extensive. Next, we want to keep up with the status. Is the risk still active, or are we able to close this risk because it's not needed to monitor? The risk can be open, closed, or worse yet, realized. It actually happens, and we need to communicate that. Then we have the owner. When the risk is identified, we need to decide who owns the risk. In other words, who is responsible for monitoring and reporting if there are any changes? For a project, that would be the person on the team, not a department, whenever possible. For example, Steve from server support may be responsible for tracking the risk, even if it is the whole department that performs this function. It is the who can I count on and hearing from if this happens. Note, sometimes you may hear this referred to, hopefully jokingly, as whose throat to choke. While funny, I recommend avoiding this as it sets up a reluctance for the owner to accept the responsibility or prevent candor when this is most important. It's not about blaming, but reporting. Do. Is there a date where this risk may expire? For example, this may be a permitting process for a project, and we need to secure that work permit in order to move forward with the effort. In this case, we believe that after a given date, the risk either has happened or is no longer a risk. After this due date, if all goes well, we can close the risk, and we're back to the risk status. Now let's take a look at our expanded risk register. We can walk through the items discussed so far, and you'll begin to see that this is more than just an informational list, but this is actually a living document. This can be shared and communicated with stakeholders. This register has color coding in the first column. In some organizations, you'll find executives easily respond to this sort of color scheme, and there's an automatic aversion to red. For clarity, be sure to include a legend that spells out these tiers. We added the risk title, just a quick way to refer to the risk. With the title, you may feel it helpful to add the risk description as well. We have the impact description, which gives additional detail to the consumer of this information who may not have been part of the discussion. So the impact of the risk is better understood as well as being documented. And we have status. One goal for a manager is to drive down risks and close them. They can be closed because they're either so well mitigated or because the window where the risk was possible has expired. We also have our owners. But as I said earlier, I would recommend adding people to this, not whole departments. We have due dates for most of these items. It wasn't needed for team loss because we closed the risk earlier and before with all the additional resources. Notice I added the response plan for the customer rejection, a short description, closing with the customer reorders. Customer reordering is the opposite of rejecting the feature. In this case, the customer rejection can't happen after 7:10 because we have completed our requirements gathering and gotten the customer to buy into the new solution. We were able to cross this last item off on our list by having them fully mitigated. The additional team member had been assigned or transferred. IT had verified a vendor who provides a backup site for such instances. Now we need to stay on top of these risks, keeping them managed at bay. This is often referred to as reviewing or grooming the risk register. First, you want to focus on the top risks. You may find it helpful to keep this as a part of your regular reporting, but focus on the top 5 or any risks with an abnormally high score. You want to make sure to review the risks regularly with a team, perhaps weekly or at some check-in. Set a cadence and stick to it. Expect to add new risks and hopefully retire others. Publish these. Consider top risks for a status report. This is helpful as part of a project dashboard as well. One exception. Some of these may be politically sensitive. Be mindful of that possibility and address accordingly. Set a standard that higher risks may need a more formal written plan, and consider adding a sponsor sign-off on that risk plan. I have worked with clients where the IT was constantly under pressure to be more transparent. However, they hid much of the risk the team faced and paid dearly for it when they impacted the credibility. Remember, uncertainty is a risk multiplier. We opened with a question: is there a way to manage risks in business? The answer is a resounding yes. In doing so, it's critical that we understand the concepts and the terms in risk management, follow the process of building and populating a risk register, and staying on top of it and grooming it, the risk register, to keep it up with the current risk landscape. Be sure to like and subscribe. Watch for the next video where we create one of our own risk registers in Excel. Thank you for joining us in this video, and I hope you found it helpful. Look forward to seeing you